Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Speaking Life podcast, where I talk about the things I love, the things that inspire me, and the lessons that I'm learning along the way. I'm your host, David Petschauer, and thank you for being here. Let's have a conversation, shall we? My goodness, a lot has happened these past few months. There is so much to unpack here since I last spoke, but don't worry. I'll fill you in on everything that happened one step at a time. In this episode, I want to share with you arguably the biggest thing that happened to me in these past 7 months, and that was when I returned to my old high school to play keyboard for their annual musical. Most definitely, all of you listening have questions as to how exactly this happened, and I'll answer them all in due time, but for now, I think it's important to give you some context. The high school that I went to has a music department that every year produces a musical that the directors choose months in advance. For decades, the high school has put on shows such as Matilda, The Music Man, Mamma Mia, Beauty and the Beast, Phantom of the Opera, even Shrek, and so many other musicals that I just can't name right now because there are so many. But even though the show's themes differ over the years, one thing remains the same: the rehearsal process. It is a very rigorous process, and I know this because I took part in the play myself when I was a student. However, I engaged in the play in a way that may not be what you expect. When you think of a play, you're probably thinking of actors up on stage dancing and singing. I was not up on stage doing all that fun stuff. Obviously, putting on such a show demands a multi man process. Everybody needs to work together and do their appropriate part to ensure that the show they produce is the best one that they can produce. Of course, there are the people performing on stage, but we also have people working behind the scenes. For example, there is the stage crew, who operate the curtain at the appropriate time when the show starts and closes. They also bring out the appropriate props on stage when the time permits it. We also have the audio crew, responsible for making sure that all the audio that is played during the show is at a good level for everyone in the audience to hear it. We also have the lighting crew, who operate stage lights so that everyone in the audience can appropriately see the people on stage. And then there's the group that I have always been a part of when it came down to doing the musical, and that's playing music as part of the pit band. Now, what exactly do I mean by the pit band? For starters, we perform the musical in the high school's auditorium. I want you to imagine yourself sitting in the audience. You can see the stage, right? But just in front of the stage, there's this sunken area of space. It's a fairly big amount of space, too, enough to hold maybe 20 or so people if they all really scrunch up tight. That area is what's called the pit, and that's the place where the band plays. And the band, of course, plays music during the show. Sometimes the band plays music by itself, but other times, and most of the time, the actors sing over the music to convey the appropriate story. As I said before, when I was a student in high school, I took part in the pit band for the annual musical. The first time that I took part in it was my junior year, or my third year of high school. That year, we did Descendants the musical, and the biggest thing that I remember from that year was how the auditorium got flooded over February vacation. I don't remember the details exactly, but I do remember hearing the news that something happened there and that caused water to enter the auditorium, and so the auditorium got entirely flooded. So, of course, that put our production of Descendants in jeopardy. However, we were able to rehearse and ultimately present the show later on because the music directors from the high school reached out to the people in charge of the nearby opera house, and they worked out a deal where the cast could come in, continue to rehearse, and eventually perform in the opera house the following month. By the way, This happened after the COVID-19 pandemic caused the music department to ultimately cancel their production of The Music Man my first year of high school and have no show to put out my second year of high school. So it looked like for a short period of time that we wouldn't put on a show for the third consecutive year. Excuse me. But thanks to the Opera House, the show went on. And in case you're wondering, for my senior year, there was no flooding of the auditorium, so everything was able to go as planned for my final year of high school, which was the year we did Seussical the Musical, a play featuring many of Dr. Seuss's most iconic characters. For both years that I took part in the musical, I played the clarinet. However, in my junior year, I actually pulled the double duty. Not only did I play the clarinet, but I also played the keyboard with my friend Elena. I have to shout her out while I'm mentioning her because she was also doing double duty playing the oboe as well. She's also just a great friend to have. Playing the keyboard was a bit wonky though, because I played the bass part while she played the treble part. And yeah, it was awkward at times, but we were able to make it work. Earlier, I briefly mentioned how the rehearsal process was rigorous. That has not changed since I left high school. To give you a brief rundown of the process, it starts back in December when students audition for certain roles in the musical. Then they have a Christmas break, which lasts from, the last week or so of December and goes up until the first week or two of January. And I'm fairly certain that the week they return or the week after they return, that's when they start rehearsal for the play. It starts off fairly mellow. The first free rehearsals that they have consist of the students just learning the songs in the musical. But then after that is when they start adding more things. They start to memorize the songs, they add choreography to the songs, and then they add props. They get into rehearse costume and eventually start rehearsing like it's the real deal. Over time, the cast goes from rehearsing once or twice a week to almost every day. After February vacation, where students get a week off at the end of the month, that's where things kick into overdrive. In March, they start having rehearsals every day after school, going from 3 to 8 p.m. On these days, the cast, crew, and pit band get together to rehearse and make sure everything is in top tier quality for the shows. The shows in question take place around the middle of March in the auditorium. Over the course of a week, the group performs 6 shows to present to the public. Sounds exhausting, right? Well, there's still one more thing that happens after all that, and that's strike. This is where everyone pitches in to clean up after themselves. They clean the auditorium, move the instruments in the pit band back to the music room, take care of the props, costumes, concessions, and probably many more things. I'll tell you one thing though. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that I would return to my high school after graduating. Actually, I didn't really want to go back to high school in any way, shape, or form. The main reason for that was because high school was more or less a low point in my life. I won't go too deep into it here, but a lot of things contributed to my negative perception of such a critical time period in my life. I was so uncomfortable in my own skin. I didn't love myself. If you interacted with me around this time period, you could very easily tell that I had little to no confidence in myself. Now, there were some bright spots. I was still able to make good memories with good people. Here's a shout out to all the good people I met in high school. You know who you are. But at the same time, there were jerks. And no place could you get the best of both worlds than my high school's music department. Now, I've never been one to engage in drama. I can't even tell you what some of the drama was about because I just don't know. It's probably for the better though. But I was aware enough to know that there was drama. especially in the music department. And let me tell you, by the end of it all, I was very excited to graduate when I did. I honestly don't think that I could have lasted another year. Fast forward a few years, and I'm in the middle of my first ever semester at my local community college. At the ripe age of 20, I was writing a new chapter in my life, and one that's a lot more mentally sound than the hellhole I was in years ago. I took classes at home, I didn't owe any outstanding debt, and I was pursuing things that helped kept me sound in my spare time, like playing music and putting it on YouTube, or writing scripts for this podcast. It was a quiet life, or excuse me, it is a quiet life, but one that feels nice to have. High school felt like an ugly memory, or like that ex that you're finally moving away from. Or so it seemed. One of the classes that I was taking, that's my first semester, was called Intro to Ethnography World of Work. Basically, ethnography is the study of people. What we did in that class pretty much was study and write about people. One of the highlights I have is going to my local Walmart, and doing some people watching. I would sit myself in one spot with a clipboard and a sheet of paper and just write about what people were doing and what they looked like over the course of 30 minutes. You might expect me to be questioned doing something like that, and that's what I thought, but that didn't really happen. People saw me, sure, but I was doing my people watching in peace. I digress, though. For part of our final project for this class, we were to interview someone who has a great deal of experience in a career that we're interested in. Those of you who know me know that I'm interested in making music as a career. The question was, though, who was it going to interview? I initially had plans to speak to a clarinetist who worked in Egypt. I reached out to him on WhatsApp about this, and he seemed on board, but one day he stopped answering my messages. I tried to follow up, but to no avail. I talked to my professor about this, and she said that I should definitely find somebody else and send them a message ASAP. By this point, this was the Monday before Thanksgiving, and I needed to get a move on in this project because the semester would end in mid December. At first, I didn't know who to talk to, but then a realization hit me like a thunderbolt. Actually, I think that realization came because of me talking with that college professor. I I guess I could try talking to one of my high school music teachers, I thought to myself. I was not thrilled by the idea of talking to my high school band teachers. Like I said earlier, I consider high school to be a low point in my life. Part of the reason why this is because of the music department. Now, I didn't necessarily have a bad relationship with my music teachers, but it definitely could have been better. There were three teachers that were responsible for teaching the kids in the department. There was one teacher that taught exclusively chorus, another that taught exclusively band, and one that taught a mix of both. For this story, we're going to call the teacher that taught just band Mr. Gray. Mr. Gray had been teaching at my high school since 2010, and he stayed as the band director throughout all 4 years of my high school career. The chorus position was another matter entirely. Before my class entered high school, the chorus director was a woman who taught at the school for give or take 40 years. There was another woman who taught both chorus and band for the same period of time. They were a what you may call a dynamic duo, very well known in our community for their contributions. However, at the end of my sophomore year, those two teachers retired. It was a massive shock to everyone, myself included. I recall at the end of that year going to this celebration that was held in the football field behind our high school, and so many people were there. They had the band play, and I remember the chorus singing too for a little bit. And that was followed by countless speeches from so many people just thanking those two women for everything they did. Now, with two teachers retired, the music department had to find two new teachers who could fill in some large shoes. And they did find such people. One of them is crucial to the story, and we'll call her Mrs. Bailey. Yeah, Mrs. Bailey. She would teach both the chorus and the band. Mrs. Bailey actually went to the high school that I went to when she was a student, having graduated in 2010. She then went to college for music education, taught elementary school kids, and now here she was, teaching high school kids. Now, I was a relatively quiet guy. I didn't have many exchanges with Mrs. Bailey. But the exchanges I did have, they always felt, I don't know, just off to me. For one, she could be a little bit sarcastic, and sometimes I felt that there were times that she used sarcasm when it just wasn't needed. I was kind of intimidated by her, to be completely honest with you, and I also felt that maybe she was intimidated by me. I can tell you an example, a time that made me think that, and it was during my junior year, which was Mrs. Bailey's first year teaching. For chorus, we were doing some kind of a creative project because a concert that we typically did each year was canceled. So this acted like more or less a substitute. Anyways, all of us were scattered around the chorus room. Some of us were in groups, others acted by themselves, and I was part of the latter. I was at a piano making a medley for this project, and while all of us were working, Mrs. Bailey was going around group to group asking if she could do anything to help. I saw her go to everyone. Well, almost everyone. She didn't do that for me. In my peripheral vision, I could see her kind of looking at me before walking away. And that simple memory that lasted 2 seconds kind of stuck with me. Maybe Mrs. Bailey thought I didn't need help, but it couldn't have hurt to ask, like, what she did for everyone else. I'm sure that she didn't mean any harm or that it was an indication that she disliked me. At least I hope that's not what that meant. But those little things really caught my attention. I fully acknowledge though that maybe perhaps I'm just taking things the wrong way here. But anyways, fast forward to that Monday in November. And I was hesitating so much sending that email. I remember I tried to go for a walk after that ethnography class, and in the face of that cold November morning, I just couldn't find myself easing up a bit. I was pacing so much both in and out of the house because I just didn't know what would happen. It had been so long since I talked to Mrs. Bailey. It had been a little over a year up until that point, if I'm not mistaken, because I did, or almost 2 years, because I did see her shortly after I graduated high school when my high school did Cinderella for their annual musical. Albeit though it was pretty short conversation we had. I don't even remember much of it, but it was still a moment where I saw her. Then again, the subpar history that I had in high school and the worries about what may happen if Mrs. Bailey didn't answer or didn't want to speak with me all contributed to me just feeling antsy. I was procrastinating a great deal on the deed. However, I mustered up the courage and I actually sent an email. I'm going to read you what that exact email that I sent her. Hold on. I'm going to find it. I have it starred on my phone in my email list. Let me see. Yeah, so this was November 24th, 2025. Let me see. It was at. I'm trying to remember. See if I can find the time. Oh, here it is. At 5:33 p.m. So here's what I wrote. Hello, Mrs. Bailey. I'm David Petshower. I graduated from my high school as part of the class of 2023. You may or may not remember me from my time spent in the music department, and either way, that's fine. I hope that you're doing well. I'm taking an ethnography course at my local community college, and as part of our final project for the semester, we were asked to interview someone and ask questions. That particular someone must have a great degree of experience from a career field that we are interested in. For me, I am thinking in a career that involves music, and when thinking of people to talk to, I thought of you because of your insight as not only a musician but also a director. If you're available, would you be open to answering some questions? We can do it through email, phone, video call, whatever works for you. There's no pressure, and I completely understand if your schedule is tight. At the very least, please consider it. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you again, David Petshower. So that's the email that I sent to Mrs. Bailey. And I didn't have to wait long because, believe it or not, Mrs. Bailey responded the very next day at the odd time of 3:42 a.m. Odd timing aside, though, when I read her response, it made me smile a bit. I'm going to read her to you what she wrote to me. Hold on. Here it is. So the next day, she writes to me back. Hi, David. Of course I remember you. How could I forget? I'm absolutely thrilled to hear from you, and I'd be happy to chat with you. Are you still living in our our high school's town? We start our break tomorrow because this was November. This was going to be Thanksgiving break coming up, just to explain what break she was talking about. And I have a little availability on Wednesday and this coming weekend. Thursday and Friday, I'm busy with my family for the holidays. Let me know if there's a time Wednesday, Saturday, or Sunday that works for you. Video chat might be easiest for me since I have a new baby and his schedule is a little unpredictable as far as napping goes. Let me know what works. What works. Nice to hear from you. A part of me couldn't believe this. She wanted to speak to me, going as far as taking some time off during her Thanksgiving break to do so. I didn't realize it in the moment, but I smiled because I could sense in that email true kindness. And from there, we set up a time to video chat the Saturday after Thanksgiving at 10 a.m. Going into that day, I remember feeling so incredibly nervous. For starters, I always get nervous when talking to people who I have not spoken to in a long time. And second of all, I was thinking to myself some worst case scenarios, like what if the internet went out, or for whatever reason the chat room link wouldn't work. I decided to enter the chat room 5 to 10 minutes before 10 a.m. so that this was kind of in a way to prevent any surprises from happening unexpectedly. I had to make sure that I made sure that my computer was fully charged, and I would make sure to keep a close eye on the battery and have my charger close by so that I didn't need to deal with an unexpected shutdown from my computer because of a dead battery. I could go on and on about things that I was concerned about that morning, but just know that I didn't have much to be worried about when all was said and done. Mrs. Bailey joined, I can't remember what time, but it was either at 10 a.m. sharp or like a minute after 10 a.m. But either way, it was relatively 10 a.m. And in that moment, I gotta say that my nerves faded almost instantly because she had such an exciting and warm tone in her voice with how she greeted me. It made me feel much calmer. It was like reuniting with a lost friend they haven't seen with in a while. It's something like that, but it just made me feel really comfortable. And we spoke for 2 whole hours. Again, let me say that. 2 entire hours we talked. And of course, during that time, I got the chance to interview her. But she and I also talked as people, not just former teacher and student. She became a mother that summer, and I got the chance to see Mrs. Bailey's newborn son. He's such a cutie. I opened up a bit about how life has been for me since graduating. I would love to talk more about this conversation we had, but I don't want to steer too far off topic. This episode is dedicated to me returning to my high school, and this talk I had with Mrs. Bailey put that into motion. Early on in our conversation, she offered me a position to play the keyboard in that year's annual musical. This year, they decided on doing Disney's Frozen. I decided that I would love to be a part of the musical, and from there, Mrs. Bailey connected me with the Pip Band's director, whom, for the sake of this story, we'll call Mrs. Thompson. Mrs. Thompson joined the high school's music department the year after I graduated high school. Like Mrs. Bailey, Mrs. Thompson is an alumna of my high school, having graduated in 2016 before pursuing music education. In December, I was given a digital schedule for when rehearsals and performances would be. It was very similar to what I endured as a student. To summarize, throughout January and most of February, the Pip Band would rehearse every Friday from 5:30 to 8:30 p.m. During that time, the band and cast would get together on 2 different Saturdays to sing through songs together. For 2 days, the week before February break, everybody would move to the auditorium to rehearse the show, and it's here where things pick up because after February break, we would rehearse every weekday from 3 to 8 p.m., perfecting every single aspect of the show. It would be an intense rehearsal process in preparation for show week. On Monday, March 16th, we'd offer a preview of our show to elementary and middle school kids. 2 days later is when we'd officially open the house. We'd perform 6 shows over 5 days, with Saturday being the day we perform 2 runs of the show in one day. Of course, I can't forget to mention a strike after our final show on Sunday. It would be tiring, especially in the later stretch, but I was not intimidated. If anything, I was excited to be a part of this. I prepared myself for this as soon as I could. The first step was listening to the soundtrack to familiarize myself with the music. Then, when I got the sheet music, I got to practicing. I don't remember how many pages there were exactly, but there were so many pages of music, definitely over 100. Not gonna lie, I was initially hesitant and thought, what did I get myself into? However, this was just the beginning. I was sure that with some time and effort, I could get most, if not all, of this music. As 2025 turned into 2026, I continued to stay at it. I certainly did not want to be a liability to everybody else in the pit band. My first rehearsal would be on Friday, January 23rd, 2026. I couldn't join the first 2 rehearsals because I had to undergo basically a background check. One day I had to head to a local community center to do fingerprints, which would then be scanned and processed into a system that would register me as a community volunteer if I had a good record, which I, of course, do. Typically, that would take 2 to 10 weeks to fully get done, and hearing that made me a bit nervous about my involvement in the musical moving forward, because until those fingerprints would get done, uh, my involvement at the play would probably be minimal. However, the weekend before Friday the 23rd, I get a call from Mrs. Thompson, and she told me that they talked with the high school's principal and they came to a consensus that I could come in and rehearse just as long as I'm not in a room alone with students, which I totally understand. Nothing personal, just taking the appropriate precautions. During that call, I asked if I could maybe come in early and ask questions related to the music, to which Mrs. Thompson said, yes, of course. So, with that, the 23rd arrived, and I just remember feeling nervous. At the same time, I was also feeling eerily relaxed, too. I know it may sound weird, but I was pacing around the house, but my heart rate wasn't too crazy. Now, I don't have a car, but thanks to some amazing neighbors, I was able to get a ride to and from my high school. Rehearsal time started at 5:30, but I got there at about 4:45 p.m. or so. Mrs. Thompson greeted me at the door. We shook hands, formally introduced ourselves, and she led me to the music department. As a side note, I was very surprised when I walked in. A year or so after I graduated high school, the department was completely renovated. They painted the walls white to give everything a cleaner aesthetic. I remember when I was a student how the room where teachers would typically be in when not teaching was fairly small and a bit cramped. There was also a music library in the department, which is a rather large room and had shelves and shelves of sheet music with a copier slash printer right by the door. Now, the room that was the library was now the teacher's lounge. I guess the smaller room is now some kind of storage area or something, but I never really took a good look. Anyways, Mrs. Thompson spent time in the teacher's lounge, where she had to deal with my fair share of questions, and she answered them to the best of her ability. Afterwards, I went to the band room to get set up. For now, I would be playing keyboard on a synthesizer that I remembered the school getting my junior year of high school. The same synthesizer that I spent countless lunch periods jamming on with tunes like Giorno's theme or something more serene like Morning of the Slag Ravine. If you know, you know. After a bit, I got the chance to meet some students who were now in the pit band, and I took a moment to really take it all in. It's been nearly 3 years since I last graduated, so there were a lot of new faces. There were still some familiarity, though. Or, I'm sorry, there was still some familiarity because the students who were freshmen when I was a senior in high school are now seniors themselves. It's still a bit weird saying that. I did recognize one such person. He plays the trombone in the school band and started doing the pit band after I graduated. He remembered me. We weren't really close or anything, but we established some kind of friendly reconnection that day. The pit band doesn't solely consist of students, though. We had adults who rehearsed along with students. Two were going to be present at this rehearsal, and these two adults were people that I shared some history with too. The first adult is the pit band's drummer named Craig. He does some gigs on the side, and if I'm not mistaken, he's an alumnus of my high school as well. During each summer, Craig would always be one of many adult volunteers helping out the students with marching band music, and later, marching when we practiced for our halftime show. Of course, he would more or less specialize in the percussion section. The other adult who would be coming to rehearsal would be the second man playing keyboard in the pit band with me. His name is also David. Both keyboard players in the pit band named David. Who would have thought? But he's a much better piano player than me though. And he's been playing piano in the pit band since my junior year of high school. Remember when I talked about how my friend Elena and I pulled double duty that year playing two different instruments? Well, David is her father. Actually, he's the father to three daughters in total, and I went to school with all of them. Craig and David remembered me very well, both looking rather happy to see me return. It was nice to talk to them and share what we've been up to as of late. Up until this point, I describe everything as rather easygoing. My first rehearsal, however, was anything but that. That first rehearsal saw us run through the first act together. Obviously, it wasn't in top shape, but the goal here was to just tough it out and see what would be needed to be worked on in the future. I remember in the car ride back to my house, I told my neighbor that if I were to grade myself for how I did that rehearsal, I'd probably score a C. And that's me being generous. At the very least, I was able to keep track of where we were at fair excuse me. At the very least, I was able to keep track of where we were fairly well, but I still had a ways to go before my part was musically sound. I was playing along with just one hand instead of using both hands. Even then, music lines fooled me, as my brain couldn't be fast enough to process what I was seeing and playing in the music in time. Sometimes I flat out just got lost and just shut down. As I said, it wasn't the best night for me, but I wouldn't let that discourage me. It was only my first rehearsal, and I still had time to practice and continue to improve. The next Friday, so now we're on January 30th, 2026, rehearsal transpired more or less the same as the first rehearsal. Only now, instead of pushing through the first act, we pushed through the second act. In terms of how I did and how I felt, just know it was more or less the same as the first rehearsal. We would have rehearsal the next day, but it would be a little bit different as opposed to the first two rehearsals. On January 31st, we would have rehearsal from 2:30 or so p.m. to around 5 or 6 p.m. We would then have a short dinner break, and then after that break, the cast would join us and would sing along with the music score. This would help everyone get a feel for how we all sounded together and understand where we were at. In terms of this particular day, the cast and the pip band would go through just the first act. And then, 2 weeks later on Valentine's Day, we would get together again, only this time we would run through Act 2 together. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, though. I remember that dinner break, I ran to the local McDonald's to grab a quick bite to eat before heading back to the high school. I didn't even eat my food there at McDonald's. I just ordered my food to go and I put it in my backpack because we had to be there early. And I remember it being very cold. And I ordered a hot tea to hold in my hand. And as I walked back to the high school in cold weather with a hot tea and two Big Mac burgers in my bag, I was nervous, but also a bit excited. You see, there were some students in the cast that I was on good terms with when I graduated high school. Keyword was. You know, a part of me really didn't want to talk about this, but I wouldn't feel good about myself if I were to just skim over this briefly because this part really bothers me. Now, being a part of this play, being in the pit band after so long was great. I cannot stress that enough. However, I don't want to just, as much as I would love to tell you that everything went great and that it was an experience I will remember for the rest of my life because it was perfect, well, then I'd be dishonest with all of you listening. I feel that I should acknowledge some things that could have transpired better. However, before I go into what exactly bothered me so much, you need a little bit of context. To make a long story short, not even a year after I graduated high school 3 years ago, my grandfather passed away. And after he passed, I felt that I didn't get enough support from people. I really don't like to use terminology like this, but I felt that I was abandoned by people because I reminded them of something uncomfortable. I am not going to go into any names here, but there was one good friend that I had who distanced themselves from me when they found out what I was going through. We never had a full blown argument or anything like that, but I could sense the distance between us becoming so large in such a short period of time. Over time, I concluded that they felt uncomfortable and intimidated by that. They decided it was easier to run away. And it wasn't just that one person. I felt that many people, despite knowing what I was going through, because I was open with it, they chose to distance themselves from me. I found myself just not speaking to many people for 2 entire years, all the while feeling angry for how things played out the way they did. I still do feel that way. This rehearsal would mark the first time since my grandfather passed away that I would see such people again. Again, with my experience, I was angry, but a part of me was feeling optimistic. Maybe, just maybe, this rehearsal could see us reconnect and have some kind of a conversation. A part of me desperately wanted some form of closure. Hence why earlier I said I was excited on the way back to school from McDonald's. With these feelings in mind, I walked into the band room and the pit band was rehearsing. We waited a few minutes, and then all the students from the cast walked in, grabbed some chairs, took their seats. I noticed some of the students that I was on good terms with after I left high school, including that one particular friend. That acquaintance waved to me and mouthed the words. I don't even want to say said the words. It was more like I didn't even hear that person. But they mouthed the words, "Hi, David." And in response, I gave a small wave back. And that was it. From that moment on, we had no more exchanges. Sometimes we just walked past each other in the hallways, not acknowledging each other. All the other seniors that I recognized when I was in high school, they ignored me. You might say that perhaps they forgot about me, but that's not completely true. I know for a fact that is not completely true. Because, I'll give you an example, the first day that the pit and cast got together, I overheard one senior ask their friend, "Is that David?" So, they knew who I was. They just chose not to speak with me. And by the way, this dynamic continued all the way until the play was over. And after that, we just went our separate ways. I feel, to this day, I feel so disappointed, upset, and a little bit angry. After 2 entire years, it felt like things were just the same as they had been since 2 years ago. And that That's a feeling that just doesn't go away. Now, despite the fact that I was wrestling with such uncomfortable and tense emotions, I was not going to let those emotions get the best of me and ruin the musical. That's just absurd. The music directors at my old high school gave me an opportunity to come back and be a part of this production. They were trusting me with the role of a keyboard player in the pit band, and I was not going to squander this opportunity. I was not going to squander their trust just because just because I was angry at some people for what happened 2 years ago. In times like this, it was important that I remained professional, and I was. I didn't need to get along with everybody, but at the end of the day, I was here to do my part in producing a good show. That rehearsal that day on the 31st was nothing short of a blur. And maybe that's a testament to how things went okay. I probably was still struggling at some parts, but at the same time, I knew even then that I was improving. There was slow improvement, but progress, no matter how small it may be, must never be overlooked. As January turned into February, Mrs. Thompson pulled David Squared, that's the other keyboard player, that's what I'm calling him, David Squared, and me aside and delivered some good news. Very soon, the keyboard tech system attachments will be arriving. Basically, it's a MacBook that has a certain software downloaded into it. The MacBook has to be connected to the keyboard through USB cables for the software to function appropriately. Basically, when a key gets played, it emits a sound for any particular instrument at any specific point in time. If I were to play a C on the keyboard, the software could emit a C on a string instrument or a clarinet, just to name a few examples. Heck, the software could emulate sound effects, not just specific notes. It's as cool as it sounds. Playing with the software, though, for the first few times was challenging. Certain instruments had to be played at certain times, and transitioning to such instruments was not automatic. I had to manually make the transition. I had to do this my junior year on the keyboard, when I played keyboard then, too. And to make those transitions, we had to press the highest or lowest note on the keyboard. That was quite awkward. However, David Squared found out a way to make those transitions much easier, where instead of using the keys, he used the pedals beneath the keyboard, which made things way less awkward for my hands while playing. Still, it was tough because there were so many transitions to make. The software lists where the transitions would be in the music, but the sheet music for the musical doesn't. I went in and marked in the music where all the transitions would be, and even so, there were times that I would miss a transition while playing, which would cause me to play the wrong instrument at that point in time. When I realized this, I would start to panic and try to get the proper instrumentation, but that would often result in me getting lost. I suppose that now is as good a time as any to talk more about the music. Across the two main acts of Frozen the Musical, there are 24 main songs. 24. I say main song is a song that members of the cast sing, but there are also smaller songs that don't feature the cast and are instead used as background music or when something very important happens in the story. If we include those kind of songs, then the count rises a great deal. As stated, there were probably like 100 pages of music to learn in total. The plot for the musical is the exact same as it was in the Disney movie, and with it are familiar songs like Let It Go, For the First Time Forever, and Love is an Open Door. With this being a musical, original songs were also added. I'm going to be flat out honest with you. I did not get all the music down perfectly for the show. A lot of it I actually had to simplify or maybe even cut because it was just really hard. Without a doubt, my kryptonite was any piece that had a fast speed with runs. There was this one piece called I Can't Lose You. It was a waltz type piece, and my god, it went so freaking fast. I had to play that piece with almost exclusively one hand because it was so fast and so much was happening for both hands that it was so hard to keep up even with one. For the First Time Forever is another piece that I really struggle with. That piece went much slower than I Can't Lose You, and the version in the musical is a little bit slower than how it goes in the movie. However, that still made the number of runs that I had to play made For the First Time Forever really challenging nonetheless. I should clarify that a run is basically a slew of notes that I have to play in a very short time period. Speed is always a challenge for me. There were also pieces that were deceivingly difficult for me. I can remember one section in Let It Go where I had to play whole notes in my right hand and I had to play eighth notes in my left, which can be rather simple, but for whatever reason, I struggled a little bit. So, yes, I struggled a fair deal when it came to the music and Frozen the musical. But there was a silver lining in the entire process. Playing this music, I truly believe, has developed me into a much better musician. I was fully aware that I was playing music that was hard. It was definitely above my skill level. Therefore, I had to be smart with how I practiced. Before I practiced, I practiced everything hands separately and tried to bulldoze my way through before doing everything together. While this process kind of worked, it was slow, especially when I tried to practice the music for Frozen the musical. At one point, I thought to myself, is there a way I can improve the way I approach practice? This question led me to a journey where I found myself watching a good amount of YouTube videos and experimenting with different practice methods. I guess you could say I fell down a rabbit hole. But through watching all these videos and experimenting and experimenting some more, I've I've been able to create a process for practicing music that works well for me. It's not perfect. I'm still working on this process to this day, but for sure, I believe my understanding of how to practice music has evolved a great deal. I think I'll lay out my entire practice process in a different episode, but I'll give a basic rundown here. What I do is break down the music into its basic components that make up what music is, which are rhythm, harmony, melody, and sound. From there, I practice those basic elements individually, and when I have a sufficient handle on said elements by themselves, then I put them together and practice a few times until I have them played competently and consistently. Doing those simple things first results in me getting a better handle on music's complexity. And as much as I would love to go deeper into this topic, again, that's for another episode. What I do want you to take away from all this is that I would have this refined understanding of music and how to practice it, or excuse me, I I wouldn't have had this refined understanding of music and how to practice if it wasn't for my time playing in the pit band for my high school this year. Now, back to the actual experience playing in the pit band, things started moving forward again toward the end of February. After weeks of playing in the band room, we were moved to the auditorium where we would be practicing and later performing the show. Of course, the pit band was moved to being in the famous pit just in front of the stage. Let me tell you, it was kind of cramped in there. To give you an idea of how cramped it was, I couldn't really lean backwards in my chair too much without hitting a music stand behind me that the auxiliary player was using to read his music. Speaking of positioning, behind me were the auxiliary player and Craig the drummer. So you can bet that things got noisy where we were. Still, I loved it. I should tell you a funny exchange that I had the first time we played in the auditorium. I had just gotten there. I got to the pit and I was looking for where I'd be sitting. And then right behind me, I heard a voice calling out my name. I turned to look, and it's the father of my best friend from high school. The father's name is also David. Man. But everyone calls him Dave. During play season, Dave works as a character coach, helping the cast members find their voice and feel comfortable in their role during rehearsals. We got to talking briefly. I haven't seen him in 2 years, but we reunited fairly well. He said that his son, my good friend, was very excited to find out that I was in the pit band. The first thing I said to that? No joke. I said, "Wait, Sam still remembers me?" Sam is the name of his son. And Dave kind of tilted his head slightly. He had this like confuddled look on his face with his eyes getting like a little narrow, and he was like, "Of course Sam still remembers you." Later on in the rehearsal, Dave's wife Lori stopped by to see how everyone was doing, and of course she recognized me. Lori further added how excited they were that I was a part of this play. It was all in all a nice little reunion that we had. Those initial days of us being in the auditorium were kind of a blur to me. We basically went through both acts to see how everything would sound with the occasional feedback by adults in between. I believe it was 2 days of us being in the auditorium. I think there was supposed to be another day where it would be just the pit band practicing in the band room, but it didn't happen because either Mrs. Thompson felt it wasn't needed, or the weather that day wasn't good. Maybe it was a mix of both, but I don't really remember. What I do remember is that this was just before February vacation, where the high school students would get the last week of February off from school. There would be no rehearsal for that entire week. I just remember the directors telling the cast members to please keep their voices intact, take care of themselves, and something about dyeing their hair. Or I believe it was to not dye their hair for this play. Either way, they sounded very not concerned, but they placed great emphasis on all of us to take care of ourselves because if you remember what I said earlier, you know what comes next. February turned into March, and now this is where the rehearsal process gets ramped up. We would present our show in the middle of the month, so this was the time we needed to refine everything to present this show with the best quality that we could. That would be done through 2 weeks of rehearsal from 3 to 8 p.m. every weekday. It was all a bit of a blur, but I do remember some key things. The Tuesday from the first week didn't see us rehearse because of some good old snow. The next day, we technically performed our show to an audience for the first time, because that was a night where parents of 8th graders from middle school would come to the high school. They would be introduced to the staff and various programs that the high school offers. In case you're confused, where I live, elementary school is from kindergarten to 5th grade, middle school is from 6th to 8th, and finally high school is from 9th to 12th grade. I know that school systems and progression vary across the world, so that's why I'm clarifying things now. On this particular Wednesday evening, the cast, crew, and pit would perform for the first time forever for the 8th grade parents as a way to introduce them to the high school music department. In my opinion, I recall that our performance was fine. Definitely wasn't perfect, but it was a solid start. I recall one of the lead singer's microphones attached to her head, not to her head, but attached to her dress, excuse me, had its audio cut off. So she had to use a microphone that Mrs. Bailey was also conveniently holding in her hand. Oh yeah, this night was the first time too that the pit band would get to wear black long sleeve shirts. In the front, they put pit band in white, and on one of the sleeves, they had our name and what instrument we were playing. And man, let me tell you, Wearing this made me feel really cool. When I was a student playing in the pit band, we didn't have these shirts. We just wore standard long sleeve shirts of whatever show we were doing that year. Having these simple yet unique shirts made me feel a bit more professional, to be honest with you. And I was excited to be professional and doing something that I really liked. The rest of the week went fine as far as I can remember. The second week was similar to the first week, a slow and repetitive process of us perfecting our craft. But there are two things in particular that I remember from that second week. First, on I believe it was a Tuesday, we did not get a whole lot done, and the reason for that was because the audio was acting all funky. We couldn't really hear the actors' lines when they're singing, and so the audio crew on tech had to get up on the stage and tinker around with the microphones attached to the actors before testing them out again and again to no avail, which led to more tinkering around. Yeah, technology can be strange, folks. That whole fiasco consumed just a large portion of time. The next thing I remember happened later in the week. We had just started a run through of the show, having just played the first song of the musical. Everybody was in a transition. The pit band was still playing a bit of music, and then all of a sudden, Mrs. Thompson stops us. I look up to see her, and she had this like really concerned look on her face. She was looking out on the stage to the far left, and she called out, "Are you okay?" Turns out that during the transition, well, I couldn't see it because this happened on stage directly behind me, but one of the two leading actors who played Elsa, hurt her ankle. I guess she tripped and something landed on her. She was helped off the stage. Of course, this sucked to see happen, especially to a lead, but thankfully, she was okay and was able to perform the next week. Now, this doesn't mean that everything was a total disaster. During those 2 weeks, everything was coming along well for the most part. It was here that they started adding props to the environment, and the cast started wearing outfits for the show. Man, you should have seen some of these props and outfits. Holy crap. They were of immaculate quality. By far, the two outfits that impressed me the most were Olaf the Talking Snowman and Sven the Reindeer. Olaf was essentially a puppet, and the people that were playing him were attached to him through being a puppeteer and controlling his movements. Olaf himself looked really good. The snowman had the ability to blink. Isn't that cool? As for Sven, he was ginormous. He was pretty much the size of an actual reindeer. And while I never pet him, he looked like he had some nice soft fur. Only one person played him. They got inside the outfit, and where their feet were, they could get Sven's front legs to walk. A part of me feels though that maybe it was better for two people to control Sven's body, because with that one person, Sven's hind legs just kinda dragged along the floor. It definitely would have been, or would have looked a lot cleaner if there was one extra person walking in Sven's hind legs. The backgrounds were outstanding. By far, my favorite was what they did for the Winter Mountains. They legit made it snow on the stage. Well, not with actual snow, of course. They used what looked like small snippets of paper and had them all fall down. You combine that with beautiful blue lighting, a bridge covered with snow and icicles, and a vast mountain backdrop, you get a scene that would enthrall anyone. Even if they were cold, the scene is so breathtaking that the cold wouldn't bother them. This may be unrelated, but I got to give a shout out to the fog machine. It made scenes give out an extra oomph, especially scenes that involved Elsa and her ice powers. However, it was not fun when the fog would enter the pit. Many times throughout the show that would happen, and in worst case scenarios, the fog was so thick I couldn't even see Mrs. Thompson right in front of me conducting the music. Let it go, I'm looking at you. In the grand scheme of things, though, the fog was nothing to be scared about because in those situations, the pit band listened to one another to keep the tempo moving smoothly and resolve together. Eventually, We had reached the end of the second week of rehearsals. We done it. Through the various starts and stops of songs, tech audio issues, dinner breaks, etc., we got through everything. The cast, crew, and pit band were all called together on stage. Mrs. Bailey, Mrs. Thompson, and all the other adult assistant directors talked to all of us. I don't remember much, but in summary, they congratulated us for making it this far. We worked hard, and we were a good group in the sense that there wasn't much drama to be seen here, which is always a nice sign because, well, high school students are known to be associated with drama sometimes. The one thing that I remember especially is that Mrs. Bailey told all of us that this is the time where we have fun. We put in the hard work to get to this point, so it's time to show everyone what we're made of. Now, we were in the third week of March, aka Show Week. Opening night was on Wednesday the 18th, but 2 days before that was a unique one. That day, we'd be performing the first act of Frozen the Musical twice, one for 5th graders and one for 8th graders. This would take place during school hours in the school auditorium. That meant everyone, including me and other adults, would have to be at school by 7:30 a.m., which is when my old high school starts the day. That wouldn't be it though, as when the school day concludes, we'd rehearse for another few hours just to run the second act. In other words, we'd be at school for almost 12 hours. On a brief side note, I must give a massive shout out to my neighbors again. At a time of year where it was mostly dark and rehearsals ended at night, they went above and beyond to make sure I got to and from rehearsals safely. Of course, I'm very grateful for that, especially for a day like that Monday, where I have to be at school for almost 12 hours. Perhaps what I'm saying sounds very underwhelming, but words don't suffice for something like this. It was a massive commitment to help me be a part of this process, and my neighbors committed. Must there be more words? You know, that Monday morning car ride was in a way nostalgic. First of all, it was raining, and I really like rainy weather. There's just something about cloudy gray skies and the pitter patter of rain that resonates very well with my soul. As the high school got within my vision, I could see buses pulled up in a line dropping students off, their engines still roaring loudly. I saw groups of students walking to the high school's entrance doors. The parking spaces that the school had to offer were almost entirely full of cars. This was a sight that was so familiar to me, yet it felt so distant as well. I walk into the main entrance and grab myself a visitor's pass to register with the school. From there, I drop my stuff in the band room, except for my music, a pencil, and some headphones. Why those last two items, you may ask? I bring a pencil to write in my music when I need to remind myself of something and make it easier for me to get certain cues for notes. As for headphones, a lot of times I can hardly hear myself when playing with the band. But the keyboards we use have ports to plug in headphones when we need them. So that's a great thing for me, as I can hear myself clearly when I use headphones. I made my way down to the auditorium, where most of the band is already there. When everyone is in the pit, we work together with the audio crew to ensure that every instrument is clear for everyone in the audience to hear. Then the process was underway for everyone in the cast, who were all dressed up nice in their costumes for the show. After that, both the cast and pit band played together with the audio setup, and when that sounded all good, we all took our places for the top of the first act of Frozen the Musical. Our first performance of the day would be at 8:30 a.m. in front of the 8th graders. The performance for the 5th graders would be at around 11 a.m. The one thing I will say about those performances is that I was excited but calm. That calm sensation impresses me because before I would almost always be nervous for performances, especially in high school when I did solo piano pieces. I had a few solos in this act where it's just me playing piano with the cast. I I didn't feel my hands jitter or anything. Maybe a small part of me was worried that things wouldn't play out well, but I still felt relieved. Both performances went well and were well received. I think part of the reason why I felt relaxed was because I knew that I put in a fair bit of effort and time into practicing my part. I was prepared, and when I'm prepared, I'm confident. Maybe I was nervous in high school because I never felt prepared for anything. I didn't think that we had much to be worried about with the first act based on our two performances. We put on a good showing, and it looked like we enjoyed ourselves as we remained focused. We ran through the second act after school, and come Wednesday, it was showtime. Call time was 5 p.m., with the show beginning at 6:30. We'd set up audio and make sure everything sounded well for the show. At 6 p.m., the doors to the auditorium would open up, and the audience would start to come in. The doors would close a half hour later, and the show would commence. Even though I said I was calm on Monday, on Wednesday I still remember feeling a bit jittery leading up to the show. This would be my first full performance that I'd be a part of in 3 years, with the last time being when I was a senior in high school and we did Seussical. I think it's reasonable that I felt that way, but then again, I worked hard to get to this moment. I worked hard for this moment. How could I possibly run away now? At some point, my jittery feelings turned into excitement. And that happened when I saw members of the audience come in as we were seated in the pit. And when that happened, I gave off a smile and I thought to myself, oh man, here we freaking go. I got antsy in my seat. There's just there's just something about the sight of the audience that gets me excited. All these people were taking time out of our day to see us. We were the main attraction here. Because of that, it was our obligation to give a show worth remembering. This was our moment. All the time we put into this was going to pay off tonight. When I realized that, I was excited to play my role in giving off a great performance. That first performance was nothing short of amazing. On opening night, we took off and set a standard for what was to be expected in the following nights. The cast sang and danced well. The pit band sounded great with minimum issues. The tech crew made everything look spectacular, and the audience seemed to enjoy every minute of the show. They were quite receptive. They laughed at many of the show's funniest moments, were respectful, and offered a lot, and I mean a lot of applause. We got a standing ovation as the audience continued to roar with applause. We got a standing ovation at every show for the rest of the week. I did my best to live in the moment and relish our performances. This may sound odd, but while I can't remember much, there is one feeling that I do remember well: the feeling of satisfaction throughout the entire process. Being a part of something that brought smiles to people's faces made me remember one reason why I love music and performing. At the same time, there was one part of show week that felt so anticlimactic, at least to me. It's something that you don't hear anyone talk about. It happens when the applause ceases and the show concludes for the evening. When things go quiet, it evokes a lonely feeling. You play your part in making something spectacular, and then time continues onward. After the show, the cast reunites with the people who came to support them in the audience. They're treated with flowers, hugs, praise, pictures, all that sweet stuff. I didn't have many people come to see me. Every night, I went outside the school into the quiet darkness of the night where my ride would pick me up. During that time, Groups of people would leave the high school together, chatting amongst themselves. More often than not, they were smiling. They seemed to have enjoyed themselves. And if that was partly because of the play, then I'm glad knowing that I had a role in creating a sense of joy. I don't think that my words alone can suffice for this experience. Remnants of happiness remained in my soul, yet I found myself in a setting so contradictory to something I was a part of moments prior. And then the last day we performed was especially anticlimactic because shortly after we finished our show, everyone needed to clean up and put away everything from the show. There was almost no time to soak in everything. We had 10 minutes to take pictures and stuff, celebrate for whatever it was worth in those 10 minutes. But after that, we split off into groups and worked to clean up the auditorium. We moved instruments and chairs back to the music department. All the cast members flooded the stage and music department as they handled many tasks, like moving props and handling outfits. We adults didn't have to stay behind to help, but some of us did contribute, myself included, before we took our leave. I went outside, waited for an Uber under such a cloudy sky, and went home. I'm sorry, but I know this sounds very anticlimactic, but that was pretty much how the experience all wrapped up. Since then, I haven't returned to the high school, but I would love to do something like this again in the future. I got $300 from being a part of this production. Maybe this sounds weird, but this was my first ever paycheck. It's quite something when your first job involves something you like doing, which is performing and playing music. Regardless, here I am telling all of you this story many months later. For the most part, this was for sure a highlight of 2026 for me. Yeah, I had a fair share of negatives, but that comes with everything, right? Despite that, I still enjoyed myself. I had fun. That's something that means a lot and should not be overlooked. I think that's going to wrap it up on this episode. Thank you for listening to me. Take care of yourselves, and we will talk again shortly. Thank you.